I'm Maria Gille, and I want to present today the joint work of me and my colleagues, Information Literacy through the Epistemic Culture Perspective, Conception, Implementation, and Effectiveness. So basically in this talk and in the next few minutes, we want to present you why we think that it matters that information literacy promotion deals with epistemic culture perspectives, or in other words, why it is important to see discipline-specific needs. So the diversity of disciplines and why this matters. You might have encountered these kind of memes where disciplines, for example, are described from different perspectives. And for example, here we have the examples of a biologist, a computer science person, and a political science student. And then, of course, different perspectives and also stereotypes are described. But what we can see here, of course, is that on the one hand, people have different ideas in mind if they talk about different disciplines, about research, about science, about people. And on the other hand, there is the part where we say what I really do, right? So the things that people think that only if they are in their specific discipline or in their job, the one thing that they might do differently to other disciplines. So I think that's a good starting point to think about, right? Because often if I see these kind of memes, I think there is at least a bit of truth in all of that. So let's have a look at this dealing with the concept of epistemic cultures, which was mainly introduced by Knorr-Cetina in 1999, and it describes the practices, mechanisms, and principles that determine how we know what we know within a particular field of knowledge. So, in other words, how is knowledge in a specific epistemic culture generated, validated, and communicated? And I think all of you might agree that being a scientist, a chemical scientist, is absolutely different to being, for example, a person that studies library science or other fields. So there is something that differs between these kind of disciplines. And for us, it was interesting to find out what is it exactly that we need to find out to distinguish the disciplines, but also to find out what they have in common. So where can we use information literacy promotions that would fit or work for all kind of disciplines and interdisciplinary, and where is it absolutely important to address discipline-specific needs. So as the picture on the left shows, right, even if we are all scientists, we talk about different things. We have different subjects of interest and knowledge. We use different methods. The disciplines generate and use different kind of research data, and mostly there are scholarly communication practices that differ to in between the disciplines as well. My university, where we had a discussion between the historians and the library science people telling that it would be absolutely fine to publish a dissertation at a repository, a university repository, or a domain-specific repository, whilst the historian said, like, you need a published book. And this was pretty interesting to see that there are really different expectations on this. So this matrix, more or less, shows some very important aspects. There are, of course, more ones, but these are, at least from our point of view, the most important ones to characterize and also to distinguish the disciplines. So, based on this, we would argue that one size does not fit all. So, and then the question arises for us, how are we addressing those differences so far? And spoiler alert, it's only partially happening. So universal information literacy standards in general assumed a very common understanding of science as well as of information, and how people deal with information. So standards so far were pretty much not distinguishing between disciplines or experts and novices, and were pretty much really based on the retrieval search process and, for example, probably also the publication process. With the framework for information literacy for higher education, this changed a bit, right? Because with the introduction of the threshold concepts, we shifted a bit away from only having new skills to understanding a discipline or a challenging knowledge domain, right? So basically the thresholds show that people need to transform to domain-specific expert and understand how information is generated, communicated, and produced in their domain. So the threshold concepts basically address our idea, but not that much domain-specific, right? It's more like a general transformation process to be a scientist. However, the first threshold, the authority is constructed and contextual, at least says something like novice learners may need to rely on basic indicators of authority, such as a type of publication or author credentials, where experts recognize schools of thought or discipline-specific paradigms. So at least there is somehow addressed a difference between novice users who would definitely try to stick to more general ideas of authority, whilst expert really can argue within their discipline and probably also within a authorship. However, the status quo so far, if we look at the offerings at university libraries, there is some positive stuff, namely that the recognition and promotion of domain-specific offerings can be found. So there are some offerings at university libraries for specific domains or for specific faculty members. But if you have a closer look at these things, then you can see that these are continuing focusing on retrieval, search processes, databases, and do not really have a look or focus on domain-specific information practices. So it's not that much the threshold concept that they are addressing, but still addressing skills that may be important for a specific domain, but not the understanding of a domain or an information process or practice within a domain. So if we now argue that it is important to address these epistemic cultures, then we also need to identify what an epistemic culture means. So how can we characterize those? And we would like to propose the information didactics research as one possibility to do so. Information didactics assumes that the analysis of information practices within a specific epistemic culture is an important prerequisite for the development and design of effective information literacy teaching and learning materials. So in other words, it is important to know your target group. So whenever you would design some kind of offering, teaching material or learning material, which is not based on the specific needs of your target group or problem-based, we assume that it won't be as effective as it would be or can be if you address the people and their needs, which is nothing new, of course, but which is not that much realized in information literacy promotion. As you remember, we looked at these metrics, meaning that epistemic cultures can be defined through subject and interest of knowledge, their methods, the research data, and the scholarly communication. And the objective of information didactics is basically defining or identifying and defining these aspects. For example, through identifying specific types of information in different social contexts. so the epistemic culture-oriented information typology. So what kind of information is a epistemic culture producing? What are they using? What do they call information? What is data? What is knowledge? Describe and analyze specific types of practical information handling in these contexts. So the epistemic culture-based information practices that we talked about before. Also take into account the prerequisites involved in information handling in these contexts, so the epistemic culture-specific requirement profiles, and take into consideration the dominant learning practices in these contexts, so epistemic culture-specific didactic practices, because not only the content that you are producing in this learning material is important, but also how are people usually communicating in this domain, through what are they communicating. For example, one of our authors works with designers a lot, and of course she argues, right, designers do not talk a lot about text, but about images or sketches whatsoever. So you need to find out that before to address their needs afterwards. So the goals of the information didactic research would be to develop didactic concepts based on epistemic culture characteristics and offer target group oriented and problem-based information literacy offerings in a more broader sense. What we also found out was that information literacy offerings, also if they were domain specific, they were basically very often still focusing on the library offerings, or as I said before, the search process, the databases, skills, whatsoever, or on. But there are a lot of new and more important digital skills, digital humanity skills that play an important role in the different disciplines. Research data management, for example, and so on and so on. And these kind of things really need to be presented in a domain-specific way. So what needs to be done to make this work, right? This is our suggestion now, and how do we think this could work? So on a more theoretical level, we think that information didactics should be established as an integral part of the training and curriculum qualification of librarians. We also think that we need to develop and test methodological instruments for the analysis of information practices. So we propose this matrix, but probably this is not the right way. Maybe there are lots of other things or more important things, and maybe we also need to have different metrics for different disciplines. We're not sure about that so far. And of course, if we have a more clear image about this, the extension of existing frameworks to the concept of epistemic cultures. So as we said before, there is something in the framework already, but it does only address domain-specific stuff on a very broad way. In a practical way, we think it would be very important that target group analysis is an essential part of teaching information literacy. And based on this, the target group-oriented offerings need to be given, and that we have, for this we need a stronger cooperation between libraries and library staff and the disciplines through the so-called multipliers. We do know that the resources and tools for the practitioners are limited. So it would be good if we have some kind of multipliers that help the librarians to analyze and to get to know their target groups, so they don't have to do that on the fly or from the beginning on every time. And also very important, and an open question so far that we addressed also is we need alternative evaluation approaches for that. So far for information literacy promotion, we had some kind of tests to find out if people gained the skills that we wanted to promote. But now the question is more like, how can we measure a discipline-specific transformation process instead of concrete skill acquisition. So we want to find out, did people actually meet the threshold concepts? Did they understand something? Are they now somehow a kind of an expert in the domain? And this is something where you need different measures, different ways of evaluation, and you might probably not simply just ask a question about a skill or something like this, but you need to find out if someone understood the information practice in a specific discipline. So we would be happy if you have any suggestions for that, because we are still at the beginning of that. That's the end. Thank you very much for your attention, and we are happy to answer questions or any comments. Thank you.